there's something about the moments when you don't see a way forward that will test everything inside of you. When you stand at the edge of what you thought was possible, staring into an impossible situation, something starts to rise up in you. You start asking, is this it? Is this where the story ends? Is this where I give up? Or is this where I see something greater than I ever imagined? Because let's be real, some of you are standing in that place right now. You've tried everything. You've knocked on every door. You've prayed every prayer, made every plan, worked every angle, and still nothing, no movement, no breakthrough, no progress, just silence, just waiting, just wondering if there's even a way through. But what if I told you that the very place you feel stuck is the exact place where a way is being made? What if I told you that the situation that looks like a dead end is actually the starting line? What if I told you that what you see as an obstacle is really an opportunity? You see, too often we think that if we don't see a way, there is no way. If the doors aren't opening, then the path must be closed. If we don't have the resources, the opportunity must not be real. But there is something about impossible situations that invite a supernatural response. There is something about not having a way that sets the stage for something only heaven can orchestrate. It's when you feel stuck that something shifts in you. It's when you don't see a way forward that you start to realize you were never supposed to make the way yourself. See, we love to be in control. We love to plan our steps, map our future, know every detail of how things are supposed to work out. And when they don't, when things don't go the way we expected, we panic. We think it's over. We think we failed. But what if the delay isn't a denial? What if the detour isn't a distraction, but a divine direction? What if the impossibility is actually an invitation? Because the truth is, some of you have been fighting battles in your own strength for too long. You've been trying to figure it out, fix it, force it to work. You've been exhausting yourself, wearing yourself down, losing sleep over things that were never yours to carry in the first place. And that's why you're tired. That's why you're frustrated. That's why you're questioning everything. Because you were never supposed to do this alone. But just because you don't see a way doesn't mean there isn't one. Just because the door hasn't opened doesn't mean it's locked. Just because the answer hasn't come yet doesn't mean it isn't on the way. Some of the greatest miracles happen in the moments when there seems to be no possible way out. Some of the greatest breakthroughs come when you have no choice but to trust. Some of the greatest victories come when it looks like all hope is lost. Think about the moments in your life when you thought it was over. Think about the seasons where you thought you weren't going to make it. Think about the times you were at the end of yourself, convinced that there was no way forward, and yet here you are. You made it. Somehow, some way, what looked impossible wasn't the end of your story. And if it wasn't the end then, why would it be the end now? The same way that made a way for you before is still making a way now. The same power that brought you through the last storm is still working in this one. The same force that opened doors you never expected is still moving things in your favor. But here's the thing. The way doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes we're so busy looking for the way we want that we miss the way we need. Sometimes we're so fixated on our plans that we don't recognize the opportunity in front of us. Because the way isn't always logical. The way isn't always convenient. The way isn't always easy. Sometimes the way looks like waiting. Sometimes the way looks like walking into uncertainty. Sometimes the way looks like stepping into the unknown, trusting that the next step will appear only after you take the first one. And that's the hardest part, isn't it? We don't want to step out until we see the full picture. We don't want to move until we have the guarantee. We want certainty. We want control. We want to know exactly how it's going to work out before we even take a step. But that's not how the way works. The way isn't revealed in comfort. The way isn't shown in certainty. The way is discovered in obedience. The way is found in faith. The way is made in movement. Some of you are waiting for the way to be obvious before you take a step. But what if the way is waiting for you to move first? What if the breakthrough isn't in what you see, but in what you choose to believe? Because let me tell you something, there is a way. Even when you can't see it, even when you don't feel it, even when everything in you wants to give up, there is a way, but are you willing to trust it? Are you willing to take the step before you see the result? Are you willing to walk forward even when you don't know where the road leads? Because the way has never been about your ability to make things happen. The way has never been about your strength, your strategy, your plan. The way has always been about surrender. The way has always been about trust. The way has always been about stepping forward when everything in you wants to shrink back. And here's the promise. When you walk in faith, the way will be made. When you take the step, the ground will meet your feet. When you trust beyond what you see, the impossible starts to shift. But you have to move. You have to trust. You have to believe that the way is already being made, even if you don't see it yet, because you aren't stuck. You aren't stranded. You aren't abandoned. The way is there. The way has always been there. The way will always be there. Now walk in it. There are moments in life when you feel like you've hit a wall. You've done everything you know to do. You've prayed, you've worked, you've pushed, and yet nothing is changing. The door isn't opening. The opportunity isn't coming. The situation isn't shifting. And in those moments, it's easy to believe that if you can't see a way forward, then there must not be one. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Think about the times in your life when you thought it was over. The times when you looked at your situation and couldn't imagine how things could possibly turn around. Maybe it was a financial crisis that felt too deep to climb out of. Maybe it was a relationship that seemed too broken to be repaired. Maybe it was a dream that felt too far gone to ever become a reality. In those moments, you didn't see a way, but somehow here you are. Somehow what looked impossible back then wasn't the end of your story. Somehow a way was made. And if it happened then, why wouldn't it happen now? See, the problem isn't that there isn't a way. The problem is that we're too focused on what we see. We rely too much on our own understanding. We analyze, we calculate, we try to figure everything out. And when it doesn't make sense to us, we assume it's not possible. But what if the way isn't something you're meant to see before you walk in it? What if the way is already there, but you won't recognize it until you take a step? Because the truth is, you don't have to see the way for the way to exist. Some of the most powerful moments in life happen when you step out without all the answers. When you decide to move forward even when you're unsure of what's ahead. When you choose to believe that just because you don't see a way now doesn't mean one isn't being made. It's in those moments that faith is tested. It's in those moments that trust is developed. Because real trust isn't about believing when everything is clear. Real trust is about taking the next step when you don't know where it's leading. Think about all the times in your life when things worked out in ways you never expected. You thought one door was the only way, but when it didn't open, another one appeared. You thought one opportunity was the answer, but when it didn't come through, something better showed up. You thought that relationship was supposed to last forever, but when it ended, you realized it was actually a setup for something greater. But in the moment, you didn't see it. In the moment, it just felt like disappointment. It just felt like delay. It just felt like another reason to give up. And that's the hardest part, isn't it? When you standing in front of something that looks like a dead end and everything in you is telling you to stop believing, stop hoping, stop expecting. But what if the dead end isn't really the end? What if it's just the moment before the way is revealed? Because sometimes the way isn't obvious. Sometimes the way is hidden until you move forward. Sometimes the way only appears when you refuse to quit. There are so many moments when we allow what we see to limit what we believe. We look at the facts. We analyze the situation. We take inventory of our resources, our abilities, our options. And when we don't see a way in front of us, we assume that means there isn't one. But what if the way is beyond what you can see? What if the way is in motion even when it looks like nothing is happening? Think about when you're driving in thick fog. You can only see a few feet in front of you, but that doesn't mean the road disappears beyond what you can see. It's still there. You just have to keep moving forward, trusting that the road will continue even though you can't see it yet. And that's how life works. You don't always get to see the full picture before you take the next step. You don't always get the guarantee before you step out in faith. Sometimes the way is revealed one step at a time. And that's where so many people stop. They wait until they can see the whole path before they move. They wait until everything makes sense, until they have complete clarity. But what if waiting to see everything is what's keeping you from stepping into what's next? You don't have to see the entire way. You just have to trust that there is one. You just have to believe that even though you don't see it now, it's being made. You just have to be willing to take the next step, even if it's just one step at a time. Because here's what happens when you start walking forward, even when you start to see a way, things start to shift. Doors that looked closed start to open. Resources you didn't think you had start to appear. Strength you didn't think you possessed starts to rise up in you. But you have to move. You have to trust. You have to stop waiting until you see the way and start believing that it's already there. Think about the moments in your life when you were convinced there was no way, but somehow things worked out. Maybe it wasn't how you expected. Maybe it took longer than you wanted. Maybe it came through a route you never would have chosen. But the way was there. It was always there. And if it was there then, why wouldn't it be there now? Too often we live as if the challenges we face today are somehow different from the ones we've already overcome. We act like this problem, this season, this struggle is the one that's going to take us out. But if you made it through before, why wouldn't you make it through again? The way is still being made, even when you don't feel it, even when you don't understand it, even when it seems impossible. And that's what you have to hold on to. That's what you have to believe. Not what you see, not what you feel, not what your circumstances say, but the truth that the way exists even when you can't see it yet. There's something about expectations that can trip us up. We have a way we think things should go. We have a timeline we think things should follow. We have an image in our mind of how things are supposed to work out, and when reality doesn't match that image, we assume something is wrong. We assume the opportunity wasn't meant for us. We assume the door is permanently closed. We assume that because things don't look the way we expected, they aren't working the way they should. But what if the way is unfolding exactly as it's supposed to, just not in the way you imagine? What if the closed door isn't rejection, but redirection? What if the delay isn't denial, but divine positioning? What if the unexpected isn't an obstacle, but the path itself? It's easy to get discouraged when things don't go the way we thought they would. We start out with hope, we start out with faith, we start out believing that things are going to work out, but then reality doesn't match our expectation. The plan falls apart. The opportunity doesn't come. The relationship ends. The path we were so sure about suddenly disappears, and we're left standing there wondering what went wrong. But nothing went wrong. The way just doesn't always look the way you expect. Think about all the times in your life when something didn't work out the way you planned, but in hindsight, it turned out better than you ever imagined. You thought you needed that job, but when you didn't get it, you ended up in something far greater. You thought that relationship was forever, but when it ended, you realized it was never meant to be. You thought that door was the only way forward, but when it closed, another one opened that led to something beyond your wildest dreams. But in the moment, you didn't see it. In the moment, it felt like everything was falling apart. That's because we tend to define success by our own understanding. We define progress by what we can see. And when things don't match what we expected, we assume we've lost our way. But you don't always get to choose how the way unfolds. You don't get to control the timing. You don't get to dictate the details. Sometimes the way requires you to release your expectations. Sometimes the way requires you to trust, even when things don't make sense. Sometimes the way doesn't look like a straight road. It looks like detours, delays, and disappointments. And that's where most people give up. That's where most people turn back, because they can't see how this unexpected path could possibly be the right one. But what if the detour is the very thing leading you to your destination? What if the thing you thought was a setback is actually a setup? Too often we fight against the very process that's meant to take us where we're supposed to go. We resist the unexpected because we're holding on to our version of the plan. But the way doesn't have to look like what you imagine to be exactly what you need. Think about a GPS. When you type in a destination, it calculates the best route based on what it knows in that moment. But what happens when you hit traffic? What happens when there's an accident ahead? What happens when construction blocks the road? The GPS reroutes. It doesn't panic. It doesn't shut down. It doesn't tell you to go back home. It simply finds another way. And that's what happens in life. Just because the path changes doesn't mean the destination has. Just because the way takes longer than you expected doesn't mean you're lost. Sometimes the way reroutes. Sometimes the way takes you through unexpected places, but that doesn't mean you're not still on track. Some of you are frustrated because you're holding on to a version of your journey that no longer exists. You're stuck because you're still expecting things to happen the way you originally planned. But what if the delay is actually saving you? What if the detour is actually protecting you? What if the unexpected is exactly what you need? It's hard to trust when you don't understand. It's hard to believe when things don't make sense. But just because you don't see the purpose yet doesn't mean there isn't one. Just because the way doesn't look like what you expected doesn't mean it's not the right way. Think about the moments in your life when things felt out of control, but later made perfect sense. Think about the times when you were frustrated, confused, and disappointed, only to look back and realize that the unexpected path was the best thing that could have happened. If it made sense then, why wouldn't it make sense now? If the unexpected led to something better before, why wouldn't it do the same again? The way doesn't have to look the way you thought it would to be exactly what you need. The way doesn't have to follow your plan to get you where you're meant to go. The way isn't always clear, isn't always easy, isn't always what you imagined, but that doesn't mean it's not the right way. You have a choice. You can keep fighting against the process, or you can trust it. You can keep trying to force your way, or you can surrender to the one that's unfolding. You can keep resisting what doesn't make sense, or you can lean into the possibility that what looks like a detour is actually your destiny. Because the way is still being made, even if it doesn't look like what you expected, even if it doesn't happen the way you planned, even if it feels like everything is falling apart, when in reality, everything is falling into place. It's one thing to believe there's a way, it's another thing to actually walk in it. Because knowing doesn't change anything if you're not willing to move. Understanding doesn't bring breakthrough if you stay where you are. The way forward requires something from you. It requires faith and it requires obedience. That's where a lot of people get stuck. They want to see the whole plan before they take the first step. They want to have every detail laid out, every risk eliminated, every question answered. But the way doesn't work like that. The way isn't something you see first and then move. It's something you step into before it becomes clear. If you're waiting for certainty, you'll be waiting forever. If you're waiting to feel ready, you'll never move. There will always be unknowns, always be questions, always be moments where you wonder if you're making the right decision. But faith isn't about having all the answers. Faith is about taking the step even when you don't. Think about all the times in your life when you hesitated because you weren't sure how things would turn out. The opportunities you missed because you let fear talk you out of moving forward. The doors that were open but you never walked through them because you were too busy trying to figure out what was on the other side. How many times have you let uncertainty keep you stuck? How many times have you delayed what was meant for you because you were waiting for a level of clarity that was never going to come before you moved? Because that's the thing about the way. It requires movement. It requires steps. It requires obedience, even when you don't understand, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it feels like you're stepping into the unknown. Too often, people mistake waiting for wisdom. They convince themselves they're being cautious when in reality, they're just afraid. They call it being responsible when in reality, they're just avoiding the discomfort of stepping into something new. But the way isn't revealed to those who wait for perfect conditions. The way is revealed to those who move in faith. You don't need to know the whole plan to take the next step. You don't need to see every detail to start walking in the direction you're called to go. If you refuse to move until you have all the answers, you'll never move at all. There's a moment in everyone's journey where they have to decide, am I going to stay where it's comfortable? Or am I going to take a step into the unknown? Am I going to wait for certainty? Or am I going to trust that even though I don't see the whole way, the next step is enough? Some of the biggest breakthroughs happen in the smallest step. Some of the greatest shifts happen in moments of obedience that don't seem significant at the time. You don't always realize what's happening while you're walking. You don't always see the change while you're moving, but every step is setting something into motion. Every step is leading you towards something greater. If you knew what was on the other side of your obedience, you wouldn't hesitate. If you could see the full picture, you wouldn't hold back. But that's not how it works. You don't get to see it all in advance. You don't get a guarantee before you start walking. You just have to believe that the way is there and take the step anyway. Think about the moments in your life when you were afraid to move forward, but you did it anyway. You took the job even though you didn't feel ready. You started the business even though you weren't sure if it would work. You had the hard conversation even though you didn't know how it would turn out. And looking back, you realized that if you had waited until you felt ready, you would have never moved at all. So what's stopping you now? What's keeping you from taking the step that's in front of you? What are you waiting for? Because if you're waiting for it to make perfect sense, it won't. If you're waiting for absolute certainty, you'll never get it. At some point, you have to move. At some point, you have to trust. At some point, you have to believe that the way exists and that you won't see it until you start walking. There are some things you'll never experience if you stay where you are. There are some things you'll never understand until you move forward. You can stay stuck in your fear, stuck in your excuses, stuck in your need for control, or you can step into something greater. But you can't have both. And here's the thing. You don't have to take a giant leap. You don't have to have it all figured out today. You just have to take the next step. Maybe that's making the phone call. Maybe that's submitting the application. Maybe that's starting the conversation, writing the plan, taking the class, setting the boundary, whatever it is. You don't have to know how everything is going to work out. You just have to be obedient to the step that's in front of you. The way is there. The path has already been set, but you'll never walk in it if you don't take the first step. Stop waiting for certainty. Stop waiting until you feel ready. Stop letting fear hold you back. The way is revealed to those who move. The way is waiting for you to take the step. There are moments in life when you feel lost. You look around at your situation, at your struggles, at the challenges ahead, and you wonder if you're going to make it through. It's easy to believe that maybe you took a wrong turn, maybe you missed your moment, maybe you've messed up too much to get back on track. But the truth is, the way has always been there, even when you couldn't see it, even when you doubted it. Even when you walked in the opposite direction, the way never disappeared. It's so easy to let fear convince you that you've gone too far, that you're too late, that you've wasted too much time. You replay the mistakes, the failures, the missed opportunities, and you tell yourself that if you had done things differently, maybe you wouldn't be here. But what if even your detours were part of the plan? What if even the moments that felt like mistakes were leading you exactly where you needed to be? Because here's the truth, nothing is wasted. No experience, no failure, no delay. Every step you've taken, every turn you've made has brought you to this moment. And in this moment, you still have a choice. You can let the weight of the past keep you stuck, or you can believe that the way is still ahead of you. The way hasn't disappeared. The way hasn't been taken from you. It has always been there waiting for you to walk in it. How many times have you looked back on something that felt like a loss in the moment, only to realize later that it was setting you up for something greater? How many times have you thought you were off track, only to see that the path was leading you exactly where you needed to go? The way has always been there. You just didn't always recognize it. It's easy to see the way in hindsight. It's easy to look back and realize that what felt like a dead end was actually a setup for something greater. But the challenge is believing that in the middle of your struggle. The challenge is believing that when you don't see how things are going to work out. The challenge is trusting that just because you don't understand the way right now doesn't mean it's not there. The greatest battles happen in your mind, the battle between doubt and faith, the battle between fear and trust, the battle between believing that the way is there or convincing yourself that you're lost forever. And the outcome of that battle determines how you move forward. Because if you believe that you've missed your way, you'll stop walking. If you believe that it's too late, you'll settle where you are. If you believe that you're lost, you won't even try to find the next step. But if you believe that the way is still ahead of you, if you believe that the path is still being made, if you believe that nothing has been wasted, you'll start walking again. You don't have to understand how everything is going to work out. You don't have to know the full plan. You just have to trust that the way is still there. And you have to keep moving. You have to take the next step even when you don't feel like it. You have to keep believing even when it would be easier to give up. You have to hold on to the truth that the way didn't disappear just because you lost sight of it for a moment. Think about the times in your life when you thought you were too far gone, but somehow things turned around. Think about the moments when you thought it was over, but then a door opened, an opportunity came, a new path appeared. The way didn't suddenly appear. It was always there. You just weren't in the place to see it yet. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you don't see how things are going to work out. Maybe you feel stuck, uncertain, unsure of what's next. But just because you don't see the way yet doesn't mean it's not there. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is just the moment before the breakthrough. Maybe this is the part of the story where you feel like giving up, but if you keep going, you'll see that what you thought was the end was actually a new beginning. The way has always been there, and it's still there now. No mistake has taken you too far off course. No delay has canceled your destiny. No failure has disqualified you from what's ahead. The way is still in motion, still unfolding, still waiting for you to step into it. But you have to stop looking at where you've been as proof that you're stuck. You have to stop letting the past define your future. You have to stop believing the lie that because things didn't work out before, they won't work out now. Because the way is still ahead of you. It's not behind you. It's not lost. It's not gone. It's still being made. And maybe that's the hardest thing to believe when you're in the middle of it, when everything feels uncertain, when you don't have the answers, when you feel like you've lost time. But the way doesn't disappear just because you can't see it right now. The way has always been there, and it will always be there. The question is, will you walk in it? Will you take the step even when you don't see the full path? Will you trust that even the delays, the disappointments, and the detours were leading you to something greater? Because you don't have to see the whole way. You just have to believe that it exists. And if you keep walking, if you keep trusting, if you refuse to let the past hold you back, you'll see that the way was never lost. It was waiting for you all along. The way has always been there, even when you couldn't see it, even when you doubted, even when you hesitated, even when you thought you had lost your chance. The way never disappeared. It wasn't dependent on your perfection, your timing, or your ability to figure everything out. The way was being made before you even knew you needed it. So now, the choice is yours. Will you let go of your expectations and trust that even when the way doesn't look like what you imagined, it's still leading you to something greater? Will you stop waiting for absolute certainty and start walking in faith, believing that the next step is enough? Will you refuse to let fear convince you that you're lost and start moving forward, knowing that the way hasn't been taken from you? You don't have to see every detail to trust that the way is unfolding. You don't have to have all the answers to take the next step. The way is there, and it's not just for someone else. It's for you. No delay, no mistake, no detour has canceled the purpose for your life. You are not too late. You are not too far gone. You are not without a way forward. So step into it. Walk in it. Keep moving. Keep believing. Keep believing. The way is still being made. And if you don't stop now, you'll see that what you thought was an obstacle was actually the path leading you to something greater than you ever imagined.